Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. And I want to do a comparison between two blades. One is a very favorite of mine, the Zero Tolerance 0200. This is, there's a lot of things that I really like about this, but mostly it's the design. It's a very Ken Onion, organic, flowing design with really interesting curves, and it is a recurve blade, which I kind of like. The other knife that I've got is the Benchmade 757 Vicar. Now, both of these are designed to be, fairly hard use, either combat or, tactical knives. Both of them would be suitable for, firearm backup. Both of them are going to be very, very tough. You could even do, although the blade shape on this doesn't really lend itself to bushcraft type tasks, it could do a lot of those harder use cutting tasks that you may do in the woods other than skinning an animal. It would not be good for that. But both very sort of hard use, higher end, higher quality blades. And what I want to ask is how these compare. And really one of the sort of supplemental questions we'll kind of deal with in this comparison is what are you getting for the extra at least $100, maybe a little more than $100 that you're paying for the Benchmade. Okay, now we want to start off with size and weight, and that's one of the things, these are both fairly heavy knives, although I will say the Benchmade is probably a little more comfortable. So let's go ahead and get that discussion out of the way. So 8 3/4 inches overall, so fairly large knife, not as big as some. 4-inch blade, and this is kind of, don't let these measurements throw you off. Just keep in mind that the handle here comes way up, right? So you see how the cutting edge actually starts before the top of the handle. So that means even though we basically have a 4-inch cutting edge here, you've got more like 3.5 inches of blade and then a 5 1/8 inch handle. So I know the numbers don't add up, but it's because of that handle shape there. This is a very thick blade at 5/8 of an inch thick, and it's a very heavy blade at 7.9 ounces. Okay, so big, hefty, thick blade, stainless steel liners. There's a lot of material here, a lot of G10. Let's switch over and look at the Benchmade. Again, it is a big, hefty blade. Definitely confidence inspiring when you get this thing in hand, but it's a little smaller. Overall, it's 8 7/8, so it's longer in length, but pretty much every other dimension is going to be a little less. 3 7/8 inch blade, 5 1/8 inch handle, so you can see there's a bit of a difference there already. Now this is also 5/8 of an inch thick. Interestingly though, there's kind of a trade-off. There's less G10 and more liners. So these are titanium liners. There's a little thicker liners in this one, and a little thinner G10. Then the weight on this, 6.6 ounces. Okay, so more than an ounce lighter, and you can definitely feel the difference in weight when you have a hold of these. The other way that this is different, if I fold them both down, notice although there is some similarity to their actual footprint, even though the lines in this one are squared off a little more, these are smoother lines, there is some similarity to the way they sort of the way they look, I guess. The Benchmade is considerably smaller in pocket, and when you add the smaller sort of size and the slightly less weight, the Benchmade definitely carries considerably easier and lighter, even though you don't have to sacrifice anything in terms of blade length or usefulness. So just in terms of size and weight, and we've talked about this before, the 0200 is a very, very heavy blade for its size. So in terms of size and weight and carry, the Benchmade definitely excels. And that's, of course, one of the benefits of titanium is that it's lighter than stainless steel. Okay, so you can actually get away with a thicker blade. There's a lot of steel in this blade, and still have a lighter knife overall, even though they're very similar in size. Okay, now let's move on down to the actual blade themselves and have a little discussion about that. The blade on the 0200, of course, is a drop point with a recurve, a very high flat grind. It's a very thick, stocky blade. See, zero tolerances tend to have a lot of metal in here. Okay, they're fairly hefty blades, and they're designed to be that way. They're designed to be sort of hard use, very tough, very durable knives. I do like the way this blade performs, very, very pointy. So that's one of the things to notice. A significant difference here is how pointed this is and how you get that nice curve here for belly. Now what that means is this is a very versatile blade. It'll do just about anything you could think of, whether it's, you know, cutting up an apple or skinning a deer. This blade's going to do fairly well at almost anything you could use your knife for. It is 154 cm, which is good, you know, it's good steel. It's certainly not as good as S30V, but it's going to be very good. And for a lot of users, you may not even notice the difference between the two unless you're fairly detail-oriented person and you kind of pay careful attention to that. You may not even notice, for the average knife user, the difference between 154 cm and S30V, although there is a difference, okay? So let's look at the blade on the Vicar, the 757. Quite a big difference, right? This is a modified tanto. It does have this swedge on top. By the way, that's kind of similar. This also has the swedge. However, this knife, where this guy has lots of belly, lots of curves, this one has no belly, no curves. I will say I've used this, so normally a tanto would have like a secondary tip here, and I have used this in that way so that you can kind of reach out and cut something with that sort of small belly portion that's formed. Let's say you're opening a box or something. You don't need to get right down to the tip. You can actually just use this as if it's the tip and pull it along. So that works, in my experience, better than this. You know, if you tried to open a box with both of these, this one I would tip right up and use a tip like this. This one you wouldn't have to, right? However, to go the other way with this one's not going to do as well with food prep type tasks. It's certainly not going to be as well suited to any kind of meat preparation. That's not going to work well at all for you. But it is great for EDC tasks, and certainly very good for any kind of sort of a combat role. All right. What I will say is this: the Adamas, it's another Siebert knife. I'm sorry about that, but the 757 definitely carries more material out to the tip. This is a really thick blade, even though it's actually a thinner grind at the very edge. So the secondary bevel, you can see how it's smaller, and that's just because there's less material here than there is right here, right behind the edge. Okay, so some significant differences in those two blades. The steel obviously is superior on the Benchmade, which has 30V, but overall, in terms of a knife I'm going to carry with me all the time and be able to do just about everything, I've got to give the edge to the 0200. It is a more versatile blade shape. Now, some guys are going to complain about sharpening that recurve, although guess what? A lot of guys complain about sharpening tantos as well. So that kind of comes all out in the wash, and overall, you know, on the comparison of blade, I've got to say the 0200 has the more versatile, more useful, or generally useful of the two blades. So far we've got size and weight going to the Benchmade, blade shape going to, or blade in general, going to the 0200. What about lockup and deployment? Well, both of these are very smooth. Now there is a difference, of course, in that the 0200 has a flipper, the Benchmade doesn't. Now I don't know if you're a flipper guy or not. I really like both, and I enjoy both. I will say both of these have a fairly soft detent, so you're not going to get a really hard deployment unless you generate that force with your finger. Okay, you're not going to, it doesn't build up pressure and then fly out the way a knife with a hard detent would do. And that's fine, right? It's just a matter of what you're used to. Some guys only like really hard detents. I'm sort of moderate on that. I don't mind. In fact, if a knife flips well, I'd prefer a softer detent because it's easier on your fingers, as long as it doesn't just come out really, really easily. In terms of retention, both of these are not super great. And so they both share that in common. Now, having said all of that stuff about retention and detent, they're really, really similar. Both are on washers, both are very smooth, both are very fast. Actually, both are surprisingly smooth for a non-bearing pivot system, which, by the way, I do kind of prefer, especially for a knife that I want to be an everything knife. Okay, if you're going to have one knife that you're just going to have with you every minute, washers are probably better than bearings because they're less likely to get crap and junk in there. All right, a little easier to maintain as well. So Both very smooth, both very light. Now they both have I have a complaint, the same complaint about both of these. They're both liner locks. Okay, this one is titanium, this one is stainless steel. However, both of them have this relief cut, and it's a fairly substantial cut in both. Yeah, the liners, the handle scales are going to add some strength to that and reinforce that bar just a little bit, but the material is thin enough on both of these that you could have done, if you're trying to make a really hard use knife, then you could have had less relief cut, I think, in both of these and increased the strength. Okay, I've mentioned that the Kaiser Vanguard series, those knives don't tend to have relief cuts, and I really appreciate that about those knives. So, lockup and deployment, I don't know. I'm going to have to call it a tie. Really, there's a matter of preference here, and I don't have a preference to flipper over thumb stud. I really like both, and everything else is really about equal between these two. So that part we're going to have to call a tie. What about the handle? Okay, let's start off with the 0200. 0200, you've got 3D machined G10, very hand filling, very kind of molding. Now I will say your front finger does just kind of lock in here, and someone with a really big finger could have some discomfort right there, and I've heard people complain about that. Doesn't bother me too much, although I will say in a draw cut grip where I'm going to try to reach out and cut something toward me this way, I rarely do that, but it is pretty uncomfortable there. Every other grip, yeah, that finger choil, that's a very deep finger choil. See how that front finger, that index finger is just buried in there. It's almost a ring, like wrapping right around your finger. So yeah, very, very deep, very grippy. You're not going to slide up on this knife no matter what you do. In addition to that, the G10 is heavily textured and the jimping is rather sharp. So this is your really, really good retention on this. The palm swell here, is a little aggressive. You could probably take this back, take 1/8 of an inch off here or something. So that's the handle. It's comfortable, but there are some minor issues with it. On the Benchmade, oh, by the way, you do have 4-way clip on this and a good lanyard hole. On the Benchmade, it's a little more angular, still very comfortable, and less hot spots overall. So the finger choil is there, but it's not quite as deep. The jimping is there, and it is very sharp. It's going to hang on to you pretty good. Again, there's not really any chance you're going to lose this knife or go up onto the blade or anything. And really, overall, the Benchmade is just a little bit more comfortable. What I would say is less potential for hot spots here compared to this one. Although I will say, if you're a lefty, this is a single position pocket clip. Now again, I've said this before, both of these, and people who are left-handed knife users will often point out, look, they'd actually want the liner to be on the opposite, the lock side to be opposite, which is a whole new process, right? Like you've got to make these knives from the start to be left-handed. And that's, in terms of lefty friendly, really most liner locks are not that well designed to be lefty friendly anyway. So that's how these two compare. And again, on the handle, in terms of just comfort and overall, sort of versatility, I've got to give it to the Benchmade. All right, it's just a little more varied and a little more, a little less likely to cause discomfort over prolonged use. All right, so that gives one more category to the Benchmade. And so as we compare these two, the Benchmade does come out on top. However, keep in mind that it's considerably more expensive. So when you add the versatility of the blade and a cheaper price point, a lot of people may go with the 0200 while it's still available. All right. So the Benchmade does have some points where, yeah, it excels. And this is a great knife. There's really no question about that. I do have a couple other comparisons I want to do with this, and certainly I want to do, I've got a comparison coming up. I've already got some of the notes made. I want to do a comparison between this and the Recon 1. because actually, you know, this is about 120 and the Recon 1 is like $100. So they're fairly close in price now that that Cold Steel's upgraded. So let's get back to these two and give my overall impression. So I really like both of these blades. This one is a little easier to carry, but the blade shape is maybe not so versatile. Now, if you're in an urban environment and you know that's all you're going to be doing that day is around town, this blade's going to be great. If you're going for a walk in the woods, if you're going to possibly do even a little bit of food prep, you probably want to lean toward this knife. And that's kind of how I would decide which one I'm going to carry with me on a particular day. All right, both of them are big, both of them are very tough, very useful blades. I really like both. As I said, the Benchmade does, just on, you know, in terms of my comparison, come out a little bit ahead. So there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I really like doing these comparisons, and I hope you enjoy them as well.